Hi, and welcome to today's episode of A Space Between. I'm just going to say, when you meet Dylan Lingerfelt, you are going to love everything that he has to say, and he is going to teach you so much, because every time I talk to Dylan, I walk away knowing something that I did not know before. Dylan is an immigration and adoption attorney. He is his home base is our Greenville office, Sodoma Law Greenville, but you could find him at any of our offices, because what he does not require him to be in any one place. And I'm just telling you, he is so awesome, and I'm so excited to introduce you to him and to have a real conversation about immigration. We're going to focus a lot on Immigration Day, because it is definitely a hot topic. And sometimes I feel like I know so little about this topic, because in the area of, when you're in a specific area of law, it turns out like you might know a lot about a little, or a little about a lot. It just depends on what area of practice you're in. And so I really feel like I don't know that much about immigration law. And so I'm looking forward to him teaching me something and him teaching all of you. So welcome, Dylan.
Thank you. It's very kind of you to say. Thank you.
Well, you're just the nicest human being. I mean, I can't believe you were crazy enough to join a bunch of family law attorneys and estate planning attorneys. And oh my gosh, we are like so lucky to have you.
Well, this is a huge blessing for me just to be here. So I really appreciate it.
Okay, tell us a little bit about, tell us your story, where you came from, how you ended up in immigration and adoption law, because obviously they're very different, but I know that there is some intersection in your practice.
Yeah, so really throughout my life, I've been to several countries in the world. We went to countries all the time when I was growing up, various reasons, mostly mission and service projects that we were able to go on. My parents took me to India, Tanzania. I've been to several places in Europe. My wife and I just traveled to Italy this past May for our 10th anniversary. Between the two of us, we've been to about 15 or 16 countries. So we really love traveling. We have a heart for the world. We love different cultures, ways of life, and really the diversity that the world we live in. I love learning more about different cultures and the way that people live and the way that they do life, wherever they may be. So I think all of that was what really inspired me to venture out into practicing immigration law. Initially, when I went on all these trips, I always spent a lot of time with children. I really have a passion to help children in any way possible. So at first, I wanted to go to law school to be an adoption attorney. So that was my original goal. And I thought maybe I could use adoption and this international idea and do international adoption. But then come to find out, you have to be an accredited agency to do all these kinds of things. So that kind of cut that idea. So when I was in law school, I decided to take an immigration class. And that's where the passion, I guess, sparked. So it just made sense for me to do immigration. So when I graduated law school, I actually started at another firm for about a year and a half. And then my best friend from law school, we decided to start our own firm. And I think this kind of leads into where I'm at, what my passion is. We were trying to decide on a name for our firm, and we called it AVP Law. We really wanted a name that meant something. And AVP stands for Ad Vitam Paramus, which is a Latin phrase, which means we are preparing you for life. So that really was our goal, was to help people prepare for a better future and have a hope for a better future.
AVP, will you tell me again what it means? I just learned something, you guys. AVP.
Ad Vitam Paramus, ADVITAM.
Cool.
PARAMUS. So it's just a Latin phrase that means we are preparing you for life.
That's awesome. What a fun name.
Yeah, so we kind of use that as our launch pad of what our passions were, how we wanted to service people, and how we could help them have a hope for a better future is really what our goal was.
And then you learned how hard it was to run a practice and be a lawyer.
Yes, exactly.
And market and do, accounting and yeah.
Oh yeah, which is not fun, the business side of it. I really wanted to become a better lawyer, a better advocate for my clients, and it was really hard to do that, balancing business and law. So I took a different job for a couple years at another immigration law firm, and then that's, long story short, a lot of different people from Sodoma Law pursued me and they said that they wanted to bring me on, and I said, okay, that sounds great. Let's do it. So that's kind of where I'm at now.
And so help me understand the a role of an immigration attorney, like the different aspects of an immigration attorney in your practice. And you talked about the intersection of children and immigration and how important children are to you, which is, in true alignment with everything that Sodoma is about, is being aligned with the families we serve from a children perspective, especially on the family law side. So how does this work with immigration?
Yeah, so one of the things that I do mostly in my practice is something called special immigrant juvenile status. It's a cool intersection between family court and immigration practice because in order to get special immigrant juvenile status, you have to get a family court order. What that is it's a special type of status for children who are under the age of 18 who have been abandoned, neglected, or abused by one or both of their parents. You just get a judge to sign off an order saying that they've been abandoned, neglected, or abused. And then you take that order, you file it with the government. USCIS is the name of the department under the Department of Homeland Security.
Okay.
And then they can obtain that status. And that status gives them a pathway to obtaining a green card in the future.
And so in that event, like who is usually hiring you? Is it an agency that's hiring you, like a nonprofit, because they know the status of the child, or is it one of the parents or a grandparent? Like who actually says, what do we do and how do we fix this?
Yeah, all of the above. So I have a lot of different referral sources. DSS refers cases to me from South Carolina. I get cases referred to me by other law firms in other states that can't practice in South Carolina, so they refer those cases to me to do the family court process. But most of the time it's parents. So one of the common types of clients that I get is a mom who's come here with her child and the father is still in the home country, hasn't seen the child in years. So the mom just wants to protect her child and make sure that she can have custody of that child, make sure that she can make decisions for them. And one of the benefits of this status is that she can get custody of that child, be able to get that child a passport, and also have a pathway to obtaining a green card for the child.
Okay, in that circumstance, is mom legal or illegal?
It doesn't really matter.
Okay.
I know personally, usually whenever these clients come to me, like what their status is and what's going on in their situation, because usually I'm developing a plan for the child and for the parent. But I mean, it's kind of 50-50 usually is whether or not they are here lawfully or undocumented.
And then, yes, undocumented is a better way to say. Is that the more politically correct way to say it?
I think it's more politically correct.
Okay.
In our day and age, there's a lot of rhetoric that goes around, that gets passed around, which is one thing I was hoping to maybe talk about later.
Oh, I do want to talk about it because I'm, every time I turn on the news, as recent as last night, there's something new happening in the in the world of immigration, and I'm trying to keep up. I'm not able to keep up. So yes, I would love to talk about that.
Okay. Well, we could talk about it now. So one of the things that I think is really important for us as a community, as we live in Charlotte, Greenville, wherever we may live, I think rhetoric is really important. The words we use and what we call people, what we say to them is really important because perception sometimes can become that reality. If you call someone illegal enough times, they're going to feel it. Your ability to look at that person more as a human being than as someone who shouldn't be here or we should get them out of this country, I think that can really hinder and hurt our communities, especially when we don't know what they've gone through. If we judge them prematurely or if we think that they may not be here lawfully, whatever it may be, it can really damage our perception of them and their perception of themselves.
Yeah, I was going to say, and their perception of themselves. I mean, it does sound very dehumanizing to say, now that I think of it, okay, well, I'm not using that word anymore. I'm going to say undocumented.
Yeah, ICE agents have broad parameters, and the president recently said that they have even more broad parameters as to who they can arrest and detain. So they can't go into a place without a warrant, just like any other cop or any other law enforcement, as our rights from the Constitution give us, they have to have a warrant for someone's arrest. But if they're in the process and someone is in the vicinity, in the locale, and they can see them, if they ask them, oh, show me your passport. Oh, I see you're from Guatemala. Let me detain you until we can figure this out. So they can detain a lot of people at one time. So one thing that's really important is like for immigrants to know their rights and what they can or shouldn't say to law enforcement and also to ICE agents.
Okay, and in that case, if mom or dad is detained and taken somewhere for some period of time, what happens to their children if they have children? And what if they're, and tell me both scenarios, like if they're documented or undocumented.
So if they are documented, if they are detained because they commit some kind of crime or they're just picked up, a lot of times they have a defense to getting out of detainment. I have a visa, or I have a green card, or I'm a citizen, whatever it may be, they have a defense. If they're undocumented, normally they get placed in removal proceedings, depending on whether or not they have some kind of violent criminal history, if they've been convicted of that, if they have a prior removal order. There's a lot of people that have prior removal orders.
Okay.
If those are the situations, they can just be put on a plane and sent. They don't have a right to a judge or a hearing.
Okay.
But if they have never had a removal order, no criminal history, they have a right to go through a removal proceedings process where they can go in front of an immigration judge, claim a defense. Normally their defense is asylum or whatever other reason why they should be able to stay.
Okay.
Their children typically are either picked up with them, or if there are children that aren't physically with them when they get detained, normally it's just family, DSS gets involved, or there are guardian nomination forms, power of attorney type documents that can be enforced in those situations for like a cousin, an aunt, an uncle to take custody of that child.
Okay, and help me understand the role of the immigration attorney in that position, or do you have a family law attorney in that position? Because I feel like there's some crossover.
Yeah,
I mean, I'm not
is.
there. I know that there are some attorneys that do family law in our practice that are really familiar with that process. I am not one of them. But so can you tell me the role of the immigration attorney versus a family law attorney in that scenario?
Yeah, so a family law attorney in that scenario would be the person that the aunt or uncle hires to help them get custody of that child.
Okay.
And in that situation, let's say the mom gets detained, but the father's been out of the country for years. There might be a special immigrant juvenile status situation they might be able to get for the child.
Okay.
But mostly it's just hiring that attorney to be able to help that person get custody of that child, so that way the child is somewhat protected, especially if that person that's getting custody of them is a U.S. citizen or a green card holder. The immigration attorney in that situation would most likely help defend the mother who gets detained from being deported from the country.
Okay, so what if you're undocumented and you're living in this state of fear? Mm-hmm. Because that's what I think of. Like, if you're undocumented and you do work, you are employed, your children are in school, and but I would imagine that you would be walking around in this state of fear. So what advice do you give that person? Do you just continue to hold your breath, make sure that whatever status you have is always on you, or do you say, are you more active in making sure that you're protected?
I think there's a few things that people should do.
Okay.
One, I know it's somewhat biased, but you should definitely speak to a qualified immigration attorney to get an analysis done of, do you have any options right now? Is there anything that you can proactively file for? And also to know what your rights are. So you can speak with an immigration attorney to determine what those options are, what is a plan in place. So let's say you do get detained.
Okay.
What happens to my family? What happens to my kids? What happens to my financial accounts? I own a business. What happens to my business? You can get power of attorneys, guardian nomination forms done to help protect your family and your financial assets. Just so that way you know, here's a plan. Call my attorney. Here's his number. So that way everyone knows what happens if you get detained. Something else that's really important is to know what your rights are specifically when it comes to communicating with law enforcement and ICE agents. I'm glad you brought that up. I brought this card with me. These are Know Your Rights cards. The Immigrant Legal Resource Center, they put them out every year, and they're out of stock right now. Like, you try to buy them, there's just so many people ordering these. These are little cards that people can carry around with them that tells an officer what your rights are. So they come in Spanish and English. So on one side, it tells you what you should do, and on the other side, you can give it to the officer, and it tells the officer, I'm exercising my rights. I need to speak with an attorney. I'm not going to talk to you. I'm not going to show you any documentation. You are not allowed in my house. If they don't have a warrant for your arrest or to enter your house, do not let them in your house. If they don't have a warrant for your arrest or to speak with you, you don't have to talk to them. You don't have to show them any documentation. The one exception to that people ask a lot about is, what if I'm driving and you get pulled over? Well,
Right.
If you have a driver's license, show them your driver's license. If you have a passport, don't show them your passport. All an ICE officer needs is cause to arrest you. And showing them that you are not born here is cause for them to arrest you.
Wow. You guys, we have these at the reception desk at least 2 of our offices, because when Dylan showed this to me the first time, I loved it. And I thought it was really, really helpful. And I love that it gives advice to both the agent or the officer, and also to the person that they're asking questions. This thing is awesome. I love this. And we'll probably also have this on our website. It's ilrc.org/red-cards.
Yeah, you can order those
This is
online.
really cool.
You can also print them yourself.
Yeah.
I've printed them before to give to clients while we were waiting for them to come in the mail. So it's just really important for immigrants to know what their rights are. And I would even go so far as to say it's really important for U.S. citizens and green card holders to know what their rights are. One way we can help out our community of immigrants who are supporting us in so many different ways through their work that they do. A lot of the things in this country would crumble if a lot of the immigrants were not allowed to stay in the United States. And also to say that this country was founded on immigrants coming from Great Britain. But U.S. citizens, green card holders, knowing their rights, exercising those rights with officers, especially ICE officers, helps them know, like, I can't just step all over people. I can't just ask them questions or do things that are illegal or unconstitutional.
That's such a hard place to be in, you know? Like, it's, you, as an officer of the court, we have a duty to make sure we're doing what we're required to do as part of our job. And then also, you know, we also have a job of advising our clients. And so making sure that there's balance in that. I mean, it's really, it is a fine line sometimes, right?
Yeah. Advising clients to do what's lawful and telling them, I cannot advise you to do anything that breaks the law. But if this were to happen, this is what can happen to you. Let's find out alternative pathways to helping you stay in the United States lawfully if they do exist.
Okay, I want to talk a little bit about the marriage side of things. I made myself a note because I'm always interested in finding out what is a common misconception that people have about marriage-based green cards. You know, because on the divorce side of things, we see the threats that come from green cards related to marriage when people start to split, like the fear that they're going to get deported, or that what the other parent's going to do to them, right? To limit their rights as a parent. Yeah.
I think to start, it'd be important to just mention that you can get a green card based on marriage if you are married to a U.S. citizen or another green card holder. And green card holder, by that I mean a lawful permanent resident. So,
and it's permanent.
Correct, yes.
Okay.
So
permanent, wait, I'm sorry. In my world, permanent doesn't always mean permanent, right? Like, we might have a permanent custody order, but a permanent custody order is only, it's really not permanent. If either party wants to file a modification, a request to modify it, or a motion to modify, they can, so long as they, and they can be successful so long as they meet certain criteria. So when a family law attorney says permanent, we don't always mean permanent.
Yeah.
So when you say a permanent, you have permanent residency if you have a green card, that actually means permanent.
Correct, yes.
So no one can take it from you for any reason.
Well, that's not necessarily true. I guess
See?
it's
It's not permanent.
It's permanent
See?
until it's not.
Nothing, damn lawyers. Yeah. Okay.
It's permanent until it's not.
Okay.
Which I guess is the same situation in family
Okay.
law.
All right. So permanent.
So there's several types of green cards, but generally speaking, lawful permanent residence is good for 10 years. So you have to
Okay.
renew it every 10 years.
Okay.
There are things that can make you quote unquote inadmissible, which are things that would cause a court, especially an immigration court, to revoke your lawful permanent residence.
Okay.
So it's important if you have a green card to file for citizenship as soon as you can. So that way you're no longer a permanent resident, you become a citizen. And unless something changes in the law, it's really hard for them to revoke that citizenship unless it was based on fraud. So to go to the marriage point, I think one big misconception that people have with marriage-based green cards is the timing of it all. So I've heard a lot, people say, well, I want to wait to get married because I don't want my wife to think that I'm, using her to get a green card.
Okay.
I know this is more personal to the situation, to whatever that person's going through, but in my experience, a spouse who loves their spouse wants to help them in any way possible. So don't ever let that be a hindrance if you haven't actually discussed that with your spouse first. So that's one misconception that I think people have. Another one is, if you do get married, how long should I wait to file my green card? Well, technically, you can file the day after you get married.
Okay.
The problem is going to be gathering evidence to show that you are married, which for the clients that I've helped, typically what we do is we file the application as soon as possible. It could take like 8 months to 16 months for them to review that application and approve it.
Yeah.
So 8 months, let's go ahead and use those 8 months to gather more evidence while we're waiting. Joint bank accounts,
Yeah, I was going to
lease
say, what's the
agreements.
evidence? Is it like your marriage photos
Yeah,
or?
there's a long list of evidence.
Okay.
But the most important two that I always tell people are combining your financial resources and living together. So anything you can prove that you guys live together, joint bank accounts, joint lease agreement, joint mortgage, your water bill, your electric bill, phone bill, anything that you can think of that you can get in the mail that has both your names and address on it is going to be helpful. So you can do that while you're waiting for the application to be approved. It's better to start early because if you get the green card, especially processing times, it can take a long time for them to review the application. So there's no reason to wait.
Okay, so, and then, oh my gosh, but as a divorce lawyer, you're like, oh, now you're combining everything and it's harder to undo in the event your marriage isn't successful.
Yeah.
I mean, we're giving the opposite advice.
Yeah, I mean, that's very true.
I mean, depending on what state you're in, it doesn't matter how things are titled. Like, I recognize, that's obviously a big difference, but it is harder to undo if the marriage doesn't work.
Yeah. I would say the one key difference here is that you are trying to prove to the government that you're married. Right. So all of these things aren't requirements. They're more so really good factors. So they're not elements, they're factors. So we want to make sure that the government can see that you're married. You don't necessarily have to say, okay, now my bank account is your bank account. Let's create one joint bank account and both of our paychecks for the next 6 months will go into that bank account. Or something like that to where you're not completely convoluting the mess that if something were to happen and you were trying to get divorced like you're talking about.
Right. Now, do you get involved in cases if the marriage isn't working out?
It depends on the situation.
Damn lawyers.
Yeah. So I think I always caution clients, especially when they come to me seeking advice on getting a marriage-based green card. I always make sure that they know. This is going to be critiqued. Like, people are going to come and they're going to look at your marriage. They're not necessarily going to visit your house. They don't really do that anymore. There are some situations where if they think there's fraud, they might have agents go out and like do drive-bys just to see like, are there 2 cars in the driveway, things like that. But I make sure that they know, look, if you file this application, we're going to have to prove that you're married. So if you can't give me evidence to show that you're married, then it's probably not worth it, especially if they're thinking about getting divorced. Another big thing is if they acquire the green card before they've been married for 2 years, there's another application that the government requires to keep people from committing fraud in marriage. And it's called removal of conditions.
Okay.
So say we've been married for 6 months and then I file my green card application. By the time it gets approved, we've been married 12 months. I haven't been married for 2 years. So now in 2 years from the day I get my green card approval, I have to file another application to show that we're still married. So I make sure clients know about that too. So like,
What if
yes,
you don't do that?
if you don't file the removal of conditions application, then you basically lose your green card because your green card's only good for 2 years.
How do you know that you have to do that if you don't have a lawyer?
When you get your green card, it'll say on it, it's good
So mark your
when it
calendar.
expires. Yeah,
Oh
it'll
my
say
gosh.
when it expires. So you've got it on January 1st, 2020. It expires January 1st, 2022.
One of my questions that I was going to ask you was like, and I get this question a lot. Do I have to have a lawyer? Like, can I go through the divorce process myself? Can I do my estate planning documents online? Should I use LegalZoom? Like, I was going to ask you what the benefits are of having an immigration attorney, and as you walk me through this process of all the steps that you have to take, even just on the marriage side of getting a green card, I'm like, I don't even know how people would be able to navigate this themselves.
Yeah, immigration law is definitely one that is very convoluted, very complex, changes at this point weekly. It's a very good idea to have an immigration attorney. But when people ask me, do I need an immigration attorney? I always tell them no, because that's the truth. You don't need, as far as I know, I could be wrong on this, I don't think you need a lawyer for anything other than a patent. So I think you have to have a patent attorney do a patent, but other than that, I think you can do anything you want. I
always say, like, well, lawyers are luxuries. However, my dad's a dentist. And I would say, like, but I don't, when I have a cavity, I don't feel my own teeth.
That's true.
I don't pull my own teeth. Like, I don't,
Yeah.
like, you don't want something to go wrong. And so why would you try to do something? I mean, obviously it can get costly.
Yeah.
But I know that you're very careful about how those expenses work. And I mean,
Yeah.
I know, having practiced with you now, like, I know that you are, that you definitely have the experience to walk them through it in a way that makes sense, from an expense perspective too.
Yeah.
Do you get that? Do you have clients that come in and say, can you give me a checklist of what I need to do and thanks for your advice? Or do you stick around for that whole process? Like, yeah, I'm just curious how it works, like from a logistics perspective, what the expectation you set with your clients.
Yeah, so that's one of the reasons why we charge for a consultation, is because sometimes people come in and they just want to get advice and then they said, I'm going to go do it myself. And I have no problem with that, because if they are educated enough, or if they feel confident enough to do it themselves, that's fine. But I will say there's been a lot of times that I've done those consultations, and then in a year and a half, they're calling me and saying, hey, this was denied or it was rejected. What can I do? I got a request for evidence. How do I handle that? Like, there's all these like things that can happen that they don't know how to navigate. They might know the beginning, but they don't know the process and the ending. So I think it's very helpful to have an immigration attorney, especially a qualified one who knows the full process of whatever it is that you're doing specifically. There's so many areas of immigration law. Everything is a minefield. There are bombs everywhere waiting to go off if you don't file the right things, if you don't say the right things. And so I think attorneys can be costly, but in the end, I think it's going to save you a lot of time, a lot of heartache, and it very well could save you money from having to refile certain applications several times. I think personally, the biggest thing that I've seen with my clients is peace of mind. I think giving people peace of mind, especially in a state right now of fear that everyone has, just giving them some confidence to know I can do this or I can't do this, and being honest with them helps them understand the process, but also helps them understand what they can or can't do right now.
And on the family law side, we clean up a lot of messes, but it sounds like on the immigration side, it's a lot harder to clean up messes because there's such a specific process that you have to go through.
Yeah, for sure. You can really mess something up like pretty drastically. And I know that lawyers even mess stuff up. especially
who don't do immigration, who try to do immigration in order
exactly.
to,
Yeah, because there's so many laws, there's so many rules, there's exceptions to every rule. So finding those exceptions can be really key to a situation, which I think is also another misconception people have about marriage-based green cards, is that some people think that they shouldn't file it because they might not qualify. But I think speaking to an immigration attorney can help them know that there might be an exception to some of those rules that they might be seeing online, because everyone is a Google expert, but very few of us actually know how to use it properly and look at the laws. And
isn't
see what's
everything
happening.
you read on the internet true?
Yeah, I think so. Basically.
Okay, I want to make sure that we hit, what is the inside scoop on immigration law right now, and what do you think we can expect to see in the next couple of years, especially in this administration? I'm curious.
Yeah, so a lot of stuff has been halted. A lot of pathways that were available before are no longer available. Those are the big things that have really hindered a lot of immigration attorneys from helping clients, is because things that we were able to do before are no longer available. One of the big things was there's something called prosecutorial discretion. Mm-hmm. That's very common in criminal law. It's also very common in immigration law. So whenever, say someone were to enter my house and I were to shoot them because I was defending myself, my family, my property, whatever it may be, that prosecutor has prosecutorial discretion to not charge me with murder because they know that I'm probably going to win self-defense. The same thing in immigration law. People are placed in removal proceedings. We're not going to try to prosecute this person, try to deport this person because they have a spouse that's a U.S. citizen. Let's not worry about that because the government resources are very limited. They have thousands of cases. Each immigration DHS attorney has hundreds, if not thousands, of cases that they're trying to deport people. They can use that. The new administration has basically said all prosecutorial discretion is ceased. We must proceed with all cases, which really hinders us as immigration attorneys because we were able to help a lot of people get their cases canceled because they had alternative pathways to obtaining some kind of lawful status. Well, now these clients are having to fork over money to pay for an immigration attorney to represent them in immigration court, whereas before they could have paid us $500, $1,000 to just file a motion to get the case canceled. But now we're going to have to go to court, fight it, and the options become much more limited as to what we can do for them.
Do prosecutors have quota they have to meet on how many people they deport in a month or a year?
That's a good question. I actually don't know the answer to that question.
I don't know either.
No.
I was just thinking, do you remember I don't know, I always thought it was made up, but you know how they say it's the end of the month and police officers are trying to make their quota on how many tickets they issue?
I don't know if that's true either.
I don't know if that's true either. Was that just a misconception?
I bet the quota...
We're going to have to get a police officer on the show.
If I had to guess, the quota is probably as many as you can get done every month. That's probably the quota because there's just so many cases.
Okay, so that's one big difference, the prosecutorial discretion.
It's a mouthful.
Okay, what's another... give us more inside scoop on these recent changes in immigration law.
Yeah, another big thing is ICE detentions.
Right, we talked about that a little bit.
ICE's ability. One of the big things is ICE is now no longer off limits to certain areas. There's no more safe zones. I can't remember the exact word. I think it's like safety zones. They weren't allowed to go to churches, schools, hospitals. They weren't allowed to go detain people who were going to court. Now all of that's off the table. They can go in those places. There was actually some officers, I think last week or the week before, maybe beginning of February, end of January, where some ICE officers attempted to go to a school in Chicago. And the administration at the school knew what their rights were, and they said, you're not allowed to come in. There's been a lot of videos that have been going around social media about that. That's one big difference is the off-limits locations are no longer off-limits.
Were they able to go in to the school?
No.
I didn't see that.
The administration stopped
the administration stopped them?
Mm-hmm. The school wouldn't let them in.
But now they can because was the school a safety zone?
Well, before they weren't allowed to go in because they
Right.
just weren't allowed to.
Right.
They weren't allowed to go in this time because the administration refused to allow them entrance.
Okay.
So the administration knew their rights, knew what they could and couldn't do. But they could if someone were to allow them in.
Okay.
They could go in, potentially detain children, which sounds crazy to me
That
that
does
they
sound
would even
crazy
do
to
that.
me. Yeah.
Something else that's new is temporary protected status, TPS.
Uh-huh.
TPS has been available for lots of different countries over the years. Basically, if something's going on in a country, there's a lot of unrest, civil war, whatever it may be. For instance, Ukraine. They issue TPS for that country. People can apply. They can stay for 18 months at a time. And every 16 to 17 months, like a couple months before it expires, usually the government renews it. Under the Biden administration, they renewed TPS for almost all the countries right now that are currently having TPS. Specifically Venezuela, he renewed it within a few days. Trump revoked it, so no longer TPS for Venezuela, despite what's still going on in Venezuela. So everyone who had TPS under Venezuela, their status will expire in April, and they'll have to find alternative sources of staying in the United States, alternative pathways. Most likely filing asylum.
What does filing asylum mean?
So asylum is basically you can think of it as a way to protect yourself from having to go back to your country. So there's two common types of protections that people seek after if they're afraid of going back to their country. It's asylum and refugees. So the qualifications for both of those are the same. Basically, you have to prove that you fear going back to your country because of persecution based on one of 5 reasons. I'm not going to try to quote the 5 reasons right now. But basically, like religion, national origin, you belong to a specific type of group, whatever it may be.
Right.
I fear going back because of this.
Okay.
If you can prove that you have that fear, then you could be granted asylum. The same qualifications for refugees, but refugees are vetted outside the United States. So, for instance, people fleeing South Sudan or Syria, they may get placed in refugee camps for a year, 2 years, some people for like a decade, and they're waiting for someone to admit them as a refugee. So these people wait for a very long time. They get vetted and make sure that they're not criminals, that they don't have any diseases. Like there's all these qualifications that the Office of Refugee Resettlement does in that country. And then once they're vetted, they're approved, they're allowed to come to the United States. So refugees have already been determined to be asylees, basically. Asylum status seekers are people who come to the border or people who are already in the United States who say, I don't want to go back because of whatever the reason is. I fear persecution based on my religion or whatever it may be.
It seems like such a subjective test.
It is. And it gets harder and harder year after year because, as you know, the law is an evolving monster where judges put more and more restrictions on these cases, whereas maybe 20 years ago, someone who was fleeing because of gang violence might have been able to get asylum. Now, like if you're fleeing for gang violence reasons, it's very difficult to obtain asylum.
Well, you know, we look at the issue of domestic violence and how, you know, sometimes if a judge has been on a bench a really long time and they've heard similar stories or they've been hardened by all the things that they've heard, that sometimes, you know, issues of domestic violence happen without any consequence because the judge isn't sure who to believe because they've been hardened by all the stories that they've heard over the years. I'm not sure if hardened's the right word, but you know, it's like, it can be so subjective. You don't know if you know, a lot of times, and I've written about this a lot, that, you know, you'll have domestic violence, the real victims, and the ones who are using the system in order to gain leverage in their domestic case, you know, because if you had a domestic violence order of protection, you might be able to get temporary custody of your children or of your home, and you can exclude the other parent for a certain period of time, depending on your success. And, you know, it's hard for the judge to know, frankly, who's telling the truth, right? And it is really subjective. And it's hard for the judge to know if you're using the system because of what you could gain versus who really is a victim.
Yeah.
It's really hard. I can imagine that, on the immigration side, those are they agents? Those the humans
Yeah.
that have to determine
Yeah.
whether there actually is gang violence or whether they will be persecuted. Like, I would think that would be a hard thing to know, and it probably has become much harder over the years.
Yeah,
like you're
definitely.
saying.
Especially as the problem gets worse in these countries, more people flee, more people come to the border. It becomes more of like a crisis where we can't let everybody in, is what people say. But if ever, just because there's 1,000 people who have a situation, or 100,000 people who have the same situation, the larger that number gets, the more difficult it is to justify, okay, if I prove it here, I'm going to have to prove it for 10,000 people because of that violence. So it gets harder, and they have more and more denials. The denial rate for asylum is like 94, 95% on average in immigration court when people are being removed. It's staggering. And a lot of those people that are claiming asylum legitimately have fear of going back, but they just can't prove that they belong to one of those 5 classes. So it's definitely difficult.
And probably having an attorney in those situations is probably paramount.
Oh yeah, it like quadruples or whatever times 5. The chances of winning is if you have an attorney. It's kind of staggering. The chances of winning like go way up because you know the laws, you know how to argue against the government attorneys and things like that.
Okay, so we talked about the 3 recent changes in immigration law and what you think people can expect in the next, especially during this administration. What is a change that you would like to see as an immigration attorney? I'm sure you have more than one.
Oh yeah, there's lots.
It sounds like getting back that ability to have the prosecutorial discretion would be something that's important. Does it look like that's going to come back?
It might at some point, but as of right now, I don't think it will. It kind of went away under the first Trump administration, so I don't think that they'll bring it back, and if they do, it'll be very limited. I don't foresee that happening.
What if this is totally out of the blue, I'm just thinking like, what if you're a worker, you're undocumented, you've been in this country for 50 years, you've had the same job, should you be, your kids are here, you're a grandparent, I don't know, I'm just, you are settled, undocumented, should you be afraid? You have no criminal history, should you be afraid?
I think that I think being afraid is not something you should be, especially if you can take some time to develop a plan and speak with an immigration attorney to figure out what options might exist. I think just having a peace of mind of knowing I can or can't do this, and knowing how to avoid situations that might put you in a risk of detention or something like that. I personally don't like pushing people towards fear. I try to bring them more towards a centeredness, a peacefulness, and knowing like if this happens, I have a plan, and living your life. If you live your life in fear, then constantly looking over your shoulder, that's no way to live. And it's very disheartening when I hear people have those experiences.
When I am watching the news, it brings up really, I get really uncomfortable with what I'm seeing, and I know that the media is doing that on purpose to me, and that I'm a sucker, and I try to stay off social media from getting my news from social media because sometimes I can't tell what's right and wrong. But like I feel like that there are other points in our history. Can you see that, like the other points in our history where groups of people had this level of fear that they were, I think from the Holocaust to, times of slavery, like I'm thinking about all of these points of time in our history where people felt safe and then all of a sudden they didn't.
Yeah. I'm not sure about the history aspect of it. I'm not a huge history person.
I don't know. You can tell me about the history of our country and how we landed here.
But I feel like it's almost unprecedented, some of the things that are happening.
Right.
Because a lot of these people, they've been here for so long. Speaking specifically about undocumented people, they have lives, they have families. I mean, these are human beings with children and grandchildren who are U.S. citizens, who've been born here, who've spent their entire lives here. Some of whom came here as children, maybe 5 or 6 years old. They didn't choose that life for themselves. They didn't ask their parents to come here or have their parents, quote unquote, force them to come into the United States, whatever it may be. A lot of these people just have situations that are just heartbreaking, and hearing their stories, you can't help but feel some sort of responsibility to help out in any way that you can, and making sure that people know what their rights are, people have options available to them, knowing how to stay safe, and how to protect their families.
I mean, I think that's like a takeaway for me is if you are in that situation, like you could, and I tell the same thing to my family law clients, like you can sit there and be passive and put your head in the sand and see if something is going to happen and live your life, or you can actually take the steps that you need to take, go meet with a lawyer, understand what your rights are. If this is going to happen, you need to know, you need to be prepared in that event. Like you can pretend it's not happening, or you can take those steps. I preach this all the time in my family law cases, like, because I always say, like, I hear so often a client will come in and they'll say, you know, in a very shameful way, I don't know what my accounts are. I don't know how much we spend on a credit card. I don't know what, you know, my name is on, or our name is on, or how things are titled, or whatever. And I'm like, okay, we got to get your head out of the sand. Like, today's the day. And I'll say, like, stereotypically, if I have a dad who has been I'm gonna say like a secondary parent, not the person primarily responsible, but now they, you know, very clearly want a more equal role in the child's life, or a primary role. But I'll say, like, okay, talk to me about pediatrician, talk to me about favorite foods and allergies and you know, medical history. And when they don't know the answer, I'll say, well, go find out. You know, like, today's the day. If that's what you want, like, it's not just going to happen because you say, this is what I want. You actually have to take steps to advocate for yourself, beyond, you know, yes, your lawyer's going to tell you what to do, but you need to actually take these steps. Just putting your head in the sand and pretending it's not happening, or assuming that's going to happen without you doing something about it is just, you know, it doesn't work that way.
No.
I mean, don't you see this? Do you see the similarities in that too?
Yeah, for sure. Definitely taking initiative and doing something about it is definitely helpful, and it's better than not doing anything at all.
Yeah.
I will also say some of the other things that you asked me about, changes, improvements that I like to see.
Take us back there.
One of the big things is restoring the refugee program. So the Trump administration, almost behind the scenes, cut the refugee program completely. There were, I believe, several hundred, if not several thousand people that had plane tickets ready to come to the United States, that those all had to be canceled because he said no more refugees. This program's been around for decades, and these are the most vetted immigrants in our country, or refugees. I mean, he cut it completely. Another big thing is asylum seekers at the border. We hear about the border crisis all the time. One of the things that the Biden administration enacted was a CBP-1 app, Customs and Border Patrol.
Yeah.
There was an app that they instituted that was more of like a wait line. So go into the app, put your name, all your information, upload all your documents. You'll have an appointment to come to the border, and we'll ask you questions. And if you have a legitimate claim for asylum, then we'll let you in and let you stay until your removal hearing comes up.
And this was on an app?
It was all in an app.
Okay.
And the first day that that President Trump was in office, over 30,000 people's appointments were canceled.
Wow.
And he canceled the program. Another big thing that I wish would change, well, bringing back the CBP-1 app would be one thing that might be helpful. Making it more clear and accessible asylum would be one thing that I would really like to see changed. Just more clarity on what is asylum. It's this lucid, like flexible idea that really there really should be some laws that go in place that change some of the requirements, because it's the laws that were there in the past are really outdated. Creating more legal pathways for people to come here the right way. I hear that a lot. People saying, well, I wish they would just come the right way. Well, you tell me what the right way is. There are no right ways. People are fleeing violence. They're fleeing these awful situations in their countries. There is no right way for them to come to the United States. There's no right way for them to go to any country, really.
But what if those circumstances don't exist and they just want to come to our country because they think it's better than theirs?
Yeah, a better life. I hear that a lot too. I mean, if there was a pathway available to them, then that would be great. But there's just nothing. If you don't have family here, or you aren't being employed by someone
right
to come to the United States, it's really difficult to find a pathway for people to stay long term.
Okay.
And the victim approach of people who are fleeing violence, fleeing these war-torn countries, it's just too hard for them. And it's just not clear. So the more legal pathways there are, I believe the more people will do it the right way. Because the opposite's true. The less legal pathways there are, the more people are going to not be able to do it that way.
Right.
And have to find alternative ways. If I was in a situation where my family's at risk, I can't afford food, people are extorting me for money, which is very common, and especially in the Central American countries, you better believe I would flee with my family. I would go somewhere and protect my kids and my wife. I would definitely do that. And if it cost me being deported from the United States, I would take that risk.
Going back to the media, you're not, when I'm watching, the border footage, I'm not thinking to myself, and I can't be alone in this. Like, I'm not thinking to myself that those lines of people crossing that water, that they're doing it because they're fleeing something dangerous. Mm-hmm. Like, they don't make you feel that way. I mean, the media doesn't. There's no backstory that they present. Yeah. Don't you agree? Is that just me in the way that I see it?
I believe the same way that you see it. I'm not going to sit here and I'm not going to take sides or anything like that and say that everyone is fleeing some kind of persecution or something, but there's no way that there's that many people and something bad isn't happening. Right. I wouldn't just take all my stuff and leave my job, my family, my home. I wouldn't leave that unless there was a reason to do so. And I think that there's just a lot of uncertainty. A lot of people in the United States are scared of what might happen. You hear in the media, oh, these criminals are coming across the border. Right. I mean, the statistics on that are staggering. The number of people that commit crimes in the United States, the percentage is way higher for people who are U.S. citizens, significantly higher than people who are immigrants. But especially violent crimes.
Right, and that's not the data. No. That's not the data that is shown to us when actions are being taken.
Yeah. So I think developing more legal pathways for people is really one of the keys to making it more accessible to people.
Right. I love this idea of, okay, so if you're not sure what your position is on immigration, and you're feeling like, why aren't they coming the right way instead of crossing the border where it's very clear that that's not where they should be crossing? What is the right way, and how do they know what the right way is?
Yeah.
I mean, that's such an interesting perspective, because I hear that too. Like, why don't they just do it the right way?
Yeah.
And it seems like that would be ever evolving, and the first step that they should take is probably asking an attorney what the right way is based on their circumstances.
Yeah.
So that's a big takeaway for me too.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that I really think that people can do, I've always been a person of action. So what can we do? With any information, maybe from this podcast that people have learned, what can we do as a community to maybe support people, support humans, support other people who are going through life the same way we are? One of the big things that I've always kind of preached to myself is love your neighbor. How can I show love to the people that are around me? regardless of whether they're documented, undocumented, whatever it is. How can I love all people always? There's a song that I really like. The lyrics say, yes, I love my neighbor more than I love his papers. It's like this idea of...
That's a song?
Yeah, it's a lyric in one of the songs. It's like, how can we be more passionate and accepting of people in our communities where we live, where we do life, our kids are playing, like looking at them as human beings and not using the wrong rhetoric, or just teaching yourself how to be more open arms, have more open arms towards people. Some things that I've thought about, I've talked with my wife about a lot too, is like having people over for dinner, like inviting people over, learning about their culture, maybe practicing your Spanish, maybe helping them practice their English.
Duolingo is not helping me.
Yeah.
My husband is on like day 350 or something, and when we were in Mexico, he had nothing. Okay, that's not totally fair. But he had a little, but it wasn't a lot.
Yeah. I think also perspective is huge.
Yeah.
I think having a perspective of where you can look at someone and put yourself in their shoes and see, what would I do in a situation if I was presented with the same facts?
Right.
We're extremely blessed to live in the country that we live, to be born here. We didn't have to go through a lot of the troubles and difficulties that these people had. We worry about what happens if we lose our job, or what happens like if I get pulled over, or what happens if I get a flat tire, these things that we stress about. Some of these people are worrying, where am I going to get my next meal? Like, what happens if I can't pay these extortioners money? Are they going to come kill my family? Like, the stories I hear are crazy. Just really trying to get some perspective and put yourself in their shoes, and just not judging people immediately and grouping people together and kind of discriminating against them because of maybe or not, you don't even know if they have some kind of lawful status in the United States.
Right. Didn't I tell you were going to love him? That's so awesome. I mean, it's community is so important, and community does not necessarily mean just the people that live around you. Your community can be so much bigger and better than that. I just heard a guy speak over the idea of community and how feeling a part of a community actually can extend your, life, your longevity. Thinking about our ancestors and how they lived in community and how that helped them survive. And community doesn't necessarily mean that we all have the same color skin, or that we all believe the same, have the same faith, or that we're all from the same place. Like, it comes in lots of different shapes and sizes.
Yeah.
And so, not immediately having judgment and looking at life through a different lens has always been really important to me. And so I love that. I love that advice. Is there, I know we're about to run out of time, is there anything else that you want to add before we wrap up today? I love that we talked about the idea of how can people in our community, whatever that community is for them, support those that are navigating the immigration process?
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's another lyric from another song that I really like. It says, love like I'm not scared, give when it's not fair, live life for another, take time for a brother, fight for the weak ones, speak out for freedom. And those lyrics have always stuck with me, of trying to do better, be better, love people the way that, meet them where they're at, and love them the way that we should be loving people. Love them like you love your own family, instead of just judging people. And loving people and meeting them where they're at, I think, is a way that as a community we can definitely rally around the people who've been here for years and whose families and businesses are here and that we support. And
okay, the next time you're here, we're talking about adoption.
Okay.
Thank you for coming on and teaching us all the wonderful things that you did today. I so appreciate you making me smarter.
Yeah, no problem.
And making all of our listeners smarter.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Yay, thanks so much.